Something tells me that I won't be able to avoid a toilet analogy. I don't really have a plan for this. I didn't necessarily think too long about sitting down to record this particular thing. So apologies in advance if it just devolves into just ranting, or because I'll be trying to process a few things in real time, even though I've been processing them in real time for a little while now. And that relates to the, I want to say recent, but at this point this movie is already a few weeks old. The recent movie I went to see on its opening night, which is called Mortal Kombat II. And I think I have things to say, but at this point I have things to say that I already said, and I think I'm not done yet. So I'm going to try to find some closure on this. So yeah, if you don't know who I am, my name's Jakub. I'm a guy who, I don't know, tries to make sense of the movies he watches, mostly in real time, either in writing or by talking to a camera or by talking to a microphone on podcasts. So before I start anything, just, do the usual things. If you like what you're seeing, subscribe and follow and comment and do all the things. If you'd like to find out more about my work, here's my website, flashonfilm.com. This is where I write, and I've been writing for a long while now. And this is also my podcast, where I have been talking into a microphone for a number of years now with my buddy, a bunch of buddies actually, about movies that, fly a little bit under the radar, at least most of them. So yeah, that's what I do. These are my credentials, so to speak. So these are my credentials. And yeah, why am I here? What am I doing? I don't know. So maybe a bit of a preamble. And this is kind of where this whole thing just devolves into a shit and piss joke. Because I went to see Mortal Kombat 2 at this point on the opening night. I want to say 10, 11 days ago. And this is something that hasn't really happened to me in a long while, and which is that after emerging from the screening, I thought I had an idea of what to write about it. At least in principle, I had some kind of kernels of of thoughts that I wanted to encapsulate in a written article that's kind of sort of review adjacent. If you read my stuff, you kind of know what I mean, because my reviews are, let's just say, a bit more free-flowing than usual, less formulaic than what you'll find on other websites where people obsessively focus on structure and then make sure that you've summarized the plot up front, and then this is where you go into performances and then maybe make a few comments about direction and cinematography and whatever, and try to appear professional. Meanwhile, I have thoughts and I just vomit them on the page, and this is kind of what happens. And every time I do this, something else happens. And I sometimes, frequently actually, I don't know where things are going to end up while I'm sitting down to write them. Probably this is a bad idea from a, call it, management or leadership standpoint. So if you're coaching someone at work, usually what you say is start with the end in mind. No, I don't do any of that, at least on my own time. At work, different story, because there are actual deliverables at the end of it. But this is not work for me. This is a hobby. Okay, so where am I going to do this? How am I going to do this? I saw this, and I immediately found myself completely constipated when it comes to trying to put some words on the page, because I thought I had ideas about what I liked about the film, what I didn't like about the film, and then as I sat down, all I was doing was staring at the first paragraph, trying to make sense of it all, and trying to find a useful hook for me to whip myself into that flow state and just find a way to just download everything that's been brewing in my mind on the subject of Mortal Kombat 2. I even rewatched the first one, not the 1995 one, although at this point I probably will, because it's been years since I last saw it, and my relationship with the original, with the Paul W.S. Anderson film, has been tumultuous. I think that's the word I want to use. Because I used to love it, and then I hated it, and then I loved it again, and then I hated it again, and then just, at this point, I want to find out where I stand with it. You can see how, you can probably gauge roughly how old I am, but, you'll probably figure out that, when I went to see Mortal Kombat 1, I was a very young person. I was 11, right? And I went to see it as a fan of the sort of, as someone who had at that point destroyed at least 4 keyboards playing Mortal Kombat 1, the original one, on my Pentium 75 megahertz PC. It wasn't really mine, it was like a family computer. Remember those times? Tell me you're a millennial without telling me you're a millennial. If you used to have a family computer that sat not in your room, but somewhere in a, let's just say, in a public space in your house, where I used to play games, and I got chastised on a number of occasions for ruining some of the peripherals because of the way I treated them while playing games, like Mortal Kombat. And Mortal Kombat 2, actually Mortal Kombat 2 I used to play before I had it on my own PC, I used to go to my buddy's house. He had an Amiga 500. Again, tell me you're a millennial, or a Polish millennial without telling me you're a Polish millennial, because we used to play it on an Amiga 500. And I distinctly remember one of my nostalgic memories concerned with that, or involved in sort of like this sort of packaged in this sort of Mortal Kombat adjacent memories, is that whenever you executed fatalities in Mortal Kombat 2 playing on Amiga 500, if you executed them correctly, the game would pause and ask you to change discs, because it was, it didn't like hold much RAM, like, so it was just loading the game as it was going from a floppy disk. And then whenever you did your combination of keys correctly for Scorpion or Kung Lao or whatever, or Baraka, I used to like Baraka, then it would say insert disc 3, and like, got it right, didn't I? But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So I emerged from seeing that film, and I was like, honest to God, conflicted, because on one hand I was like, a fan of the series in me was saying like, this is actually pretty cool, and and I had fun because the movie is super self-aware. You get to see characters that you care about or you liked seeing, even though they don't mean much apart, like they don't have really much depth, like that goes just deeper than the costumes and makeup. But then again, that's par for the course. But at the same time, I emerged tired. I came to the cinema and to watch this, and I emerged in this sort of like a weird, conflicted state, dissonant state of being equally happy to have seen this and happy that it was over. I'm not sure if I'm making any sense. Yeah, and this is maybe how how it took me, like, I don't know, days to formulate some thoughts on this, because on some level, I kind of feel like there is a responsibility I have towards, I don't know, whatever text or whatever material I produce, because someone could stumble upon this and think that I'm a critic, and I don't necessarily see myself as one. And the consensus among critics is that this movie is dog shit. No, maybe no. Maybe I'm being harsh. I think it's not one of those sort of egregious cases where critics were like, this is stupid, meanwhile fans are like, no, this is amazing. Well, and critics don't know what they're talking about. There's a little bit of that going on, because fans, like if you look on Rotten Tomatoes, you'll see that, like critics kind of just, I don't know, calcified around a consensus of I don't know, 65% fresh, for whatever that's worth, by the way. Because a slight tangent, if you don't know how Rotten Tomatoes work, at least when it comes to critics, anything that's like 3 out of 5 will get a fresh rating from a critic. So you can have a movie that's 100% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes and be across the board 3 out of 5, and you will think this is like a critical darling. It might not be. You have to read between the lines. You have to actually go in to look at this just individual ratings and reviews to find out what critics actually thought about this before you make up your mind, because it's a meta score, okay? And it's not necessarily weighted in a smart way. Metacritic is a little bit more instructive that way, but yeah, fans tend to like it a little bit more, and I'm kind of just caught in the middle of this, and I'm trying to understand what's happening, because first of all, I don't even know how to talk about this. It took me a while to figure out whether I needed like a paragraph in my text summarizing the plot, and when I did, I actually immediately went into a self-aware mode of like, yeah, you can, if you try to summarize this movie, first of all, kudos for actually making sure that this movie would include a tournament, because the whole gaming series, it was certain around a fighting tournament where you inhabit a character and then just go and learn all the moves and climb the ladder and essentially try to win the game by essentially just winning against all other players or all other characters, and then some more and bosses at the end. In the first one, I think there was also like a tag team sort of round. So you defeated, in the very, very original from the early 90s, you had to defeat all the other characters in the game. If you played against the computer, if you played against your buddies, who gives a shit? But if you played against the computer in a ladder match or in a ladder tournament, you have to compete and win against all characters. And then I think there were 3 rounds of tag team rounds where you had to, in a single round, you get to defeat one opponent, and then another one jumps in and you have to defeat that one too. And then if you win 2 rounds in a row, that's how you win. And at the end of this, I think you played against 2 bosses, which was Goro and Shang Tsung. I can't remember what the later entries did. I don't remember there were tag team rounds, but then again, at this point there's probably someone ready to write, well, actually, if they actually find what I have to say about this. So if you actually know better, just leave a comment, because my memory is patchy on this at best. And it's not like I'm trying to be flippant or ignorant about this. I just genuinely don't remember, and I didn't really do much prep before sitting down to do this, because like all I want to do is download all these thoughts and make sure, like, this is kind of like a round 2 of just having gone to the bathroom, having been constipated for a long while, and you just think like, I've done a good job, and then you realize, no, it's not done yet. I just don't feel the satisfaction of completing a bowel movement, if that makes any sense. This is me and my toilet analogies. Those who know me, they're the real ones. They know that I can reduce any point of conversation into a toilet analogy, which is what I'm doing now. So you feel the immediate urge to, like, I don't know, maybe you go for a walk and then you just come back, no, we're ready for round 2, and this is round 2, fight. Okay, arguably weirdly fitting, because Mortal Kombat games, the ones at least that I used to play, you had to win 2 rounds, okay, before you got to finish him and execute some fatalities. Where was I? I'm just getting lost in these nostalgic sort of reference to making sure that to learning how to execute Scorpion's fatality, which arguably were probably the easiest ones. Just in the first one. Sub-Zero was also easy. Yeah, the movie and the plot summary, like, you try to summarize what this movie is about. First of all, it stars I won't say a bunch of nobodies, mostly nobodies, or mostly TV actors with very little sort of face experience, with the sort of a few exceptions of like Carl Urban and Tadanobu Asano and Hiroyuki Sanada and Joe Taslim, people like that. Like, I think Ludi Lin, the guy who plays Liu Kang, he was in Power Rangers from, at this point, 9 years ago. Okay, but yeah, so it's not a movie that you get to like tag along to watching because you appreciate the actors in it, because chances are you probably wouldn't be able to recognize any single one of them unless you're into some TV shows that they were in. Not my case. I tagged along to seeing this because these are movies based on video games that I used to love as a kid, and at the same time, as I've already opined on in a separate video and a bunch of articles, links in the description, by the way, I'll try to summarize all these or just corral them into a single place for you to peruse at your own leisure in your own time. That, like, we're entering this sort of, like, well, we have entered the era where video games will supplant comic book movies as the dominant blockbuster form, and this is kind of one of these examples of movies that I think should be successful, but probably wouldn't be as successful as it probably needs. And I think this is kind of how I have problems with it, because like, the first question I asked myself, first of all, is who this movie is for. Like, I don't know, and that's a cardinal sin for a movie based on a video game, because, like, one of the big things that I think I identified about why video game movies, some of the more recent ones at least, tend to be more successful, is that they understand their audience, they understand the requirements of the fan base as much as they want to be able to understand the requirements of general audiences whose dollars they need to count on to make sure that they become successful. Because let's be honest, not every video game in existence will command that kind of popularity like Super Mario that everyone's going to go and see it. Some of them are more niche than others. And now, like I see news about like Broken Sword is going to be turned into a movie. And some of the smaller titles are getting more traction because the video game wave is upon us, right? But anyway, I honestly don't know who Mortal Kombat and Mortal Kombat 2, specifically the last one really, is for. Like when I think about this, and I didn't quite know how to dress it in words, so you won't find it in my article where there's 1,500 words on the subject of why I think this movie is what it is and why it fails and where it succeeds and how I have fun with it, but I think I have some gripes with it too, is that it exists in this weird sort of, I don't know, synaptic twilight zone in my mind where I see it connect in a very distal way to things like the Star Wars sort of cultural phenomenon and James Bond. And everyone's like, now what? What are you talking about? You, sir, are an idiot. Possibly. But this is kind of how my brain functions. I just see these patterns in my head and I can't really shake them because, first of all, like, where do I find that sort of axis of symmetry between this and Star Wars is that I think there's like the way this movie connects to certain cohorts is purely based on nostalgia and sometimes not even related to what the story will try to sell you. It's elements of iconography. Like, there will be people in here watching this, kind of sort of like there were kids who grew up watching Star Wars who didn't necessarily even care or didn't really register about all the sort of the world building or everything else that you might think, or even special effects or the sense of total envelopment and movie magic that these movies were great examples of. But rather they connected to the idea that there's this item in this movie, a lightsaber, and they were all just this was enough for them to go on like a imaginary tangent and imagine that all they wanted was a lightsaber toy, right? And that was it, right? And that was enough to kind of just get them hooked on the Star Wars sort of bandwagon, right? Meanwhile, in here, like, you essentially have this like a similar connection because people wouldn't like, what do people essentially connect with in here? And I think the answer is, again, like, this is maybe before I do this. And what's the sort of connection to James Bond? And James Bond is kind of, again, like how I see this, one is sort of, well, again, the cultural phenomenon of James Bond is that if you ask someone who's the best James Bond, the answer will fall along generational lines. As in, like, if you ask a Gen Xer who the best James Bond is, probably they'll tell you on average that Roger Moore is the best one. If you ask a boomer, they'll probably say Sean Connery. If you ask a millennial, they'll probably say Pierce Brosnan. I'm kind of an in-betweener in a way because like I'm weirdly positioned culturally because I'm just an elder millennial by Western standards, but I'm also a bit weird because I come from a country where 90s and 80s kind of coalesced, because the Iron Curtain was where it was and was lifted when it was. So I also, like, I'm on Team Brosnan while I'm also on Team Timothy Dalton, okay? But the sort of like the principal concept underpinning this is that sort of like in a long-running series, there's no such thing as a single point of convergence where every, like there's a homogeneous understanding of what's good and what isn't, and what's respected and what isn't, because there will be differences between different demographics, sub-demographics within the fan base, which at this point, because the series is as long-standing as it is, would be appropriately sizable, okay? So, and I think the story is similar here, because Mortal Kombat games are like, I don't know, they've been around for most of my life, as in like they emerged in the early 90s, and they've, I don't know, there's like in excess of 20 of them? I don't know at this point. Like it's not like there's a degree of homogeneity between them, because the first one was super serious and was very sort of small in scale, because I think there's like 7 characters in it. Second was a little bit more sort of both lighthearted and a little bit violent. It was a little bit more lighthearted because you get like babality, I think, and like you got to instead of killing someone at the end of the bout, you get to turn them into a baby. And I think Friendship was also introduced in Mortal Kombat 2. Don't quote me on this, maybe it's on the third one. I remember the third one and Ultimate MK3 and MK3 Trilogy were a bit more violent. Mortal Kombat 4 was even more violent, and then I kind of just like, I don't know, exited this loop. So I only tangentially became aware of like some of the later entries introduced these sort of like X-ray inserts of bones breaking and organs splitting and whatever for this added carnage. So this is kind of not my scene, but I understand it's there. So based on this, like if you imagine there's a whole, like, I don't know, a number of people going in to see Mortal Kombat or Mortal Kombat 2, they will have different expectations and would have different needs that need to be covered by the movie. And I think at this point the filmmakers are like, either we need to make a decision or they'll flip-flop between these. And at the same time, there's also conflicting priorities coming in from, like, I don't know, the idea of actually making a movie, because I don't know, making a film or just doing a movie in a Hollywood setting requires a movie, at least a commercial picture, to have a story arc or some kind of a dramatic sort of progression. Unless this is like an art house sort of situation where, you know, screw the plot, screw the story, screw the characters, you know, like, let's just go, just set a camera on a tripod and have people fight. You know, that would have been an interesting experience. But at the same point, I don't think anyone would be willing to spend considerable amounts of money on producing this. And a movie like this would still require a lot of money, because there's special effects and costumes and sets and makeup and green screen and VFX and whatever. Like, there's just money to be burned. Like, you can't make a you know, a science fiction art house film without some kind of a trade-off, right? So at the end of the day, I look at Mortal Kombat 2, which is, I don't know, like, it looks like a direct continuation of the previous one, which was a little bit more story driven and didn't even have a tournament, where you follow a bunch of characters you've already met. So there's some capital built in that you don't have to explain twice. They introduced a few new characters. Johnny Cage, another iconic character from the sort of the original, the OG Mortal Kombat, right? Who was made famous specifically because one of his special moves was that you got to hit someone in the nuts. And he had cool sunglasses. That's all this was, right? So you get to introduce a few new characters, refresh some of the old ones, and resurrect some of the ones that we got to kill. More on that in a second. And then we just get into the tournament. That's at least what's supposed to be the spine of this film. That's the sort of the core of the movie of a Mortal Kombat film. Just get a bunch of characters and then find a way for them to just enter this tournament and just duke it out. That's all this is. And just also find a way to introduce a bunch of characters you have never seen before, like Baraka, or I don't know, in the last one was Milena or whatever, like, or Jade in this one, or Noob Saibot, because, you know, like, oh, this Sub-Zero didn't really die, he gets resurrected, and now he's Noob Saibot, for instance, right? But like, when you're making a movie, this constitutes a problem, because producers and studio executives will be like, you know, like, this doesn't really make much sense, does it? Like, you have to like dress it in fantasy. And this is, I think, where the problems begin, because on top of everything, like, you have a bunch of different audiences who come into this expecting different things, because someone younger will expect like a violent X-ray insert laden carnage festival that they were probably too young to be playing, but they did anyway. So and that's a separate problem, because this movie has to be R-rated to be appropriately violent, but at the same time it has to also appeal to audiences who would be playing these games at home, and they're probably too young to be playing them anyway. So you kind of have to get them in somehow. So you have these sort of audiences. You have audiences like me who grew up on the first one, who expect this movie to, or who expect this game to take itself just a little bit more seriously within the confines of being camp. There are ones who grew up or remember more fondly Mortal Kombat 2, which was a little bit more camp, even more camp than anything else. And so even games themselves, they kind of fluctuated in terms of how seriously they took themselves. And this is kind of like one of my biggest points I had when I was trying to figure out what makes a good video game adaptation good, is that the movie has to take itself as seriously as the game takes itself. And you look at the whole series of Mortal Kombat games and you're like, which one? How seriously am I supposed to be taking myself? Like, Mortal Kombat 3 seriously, Mortal Kombat 4 seriously, Mortal Kombat whatever the newest one is, or MK2 with all the sort of turning people into babies, you know? Which one do we pick? right? And I think this is a genuine problem that the filmmakers were facing, as in like, how do we square this? Fortunately, they had like a self-aware thing going on, just that they've established in the first one. So that so at least I think this, at least tonally, they try to they tried to dress it that way. And at least one thing that they did understand was the main thing that people care about when it comes to Mortal Kombat films or games is nothing but the character iconography, location iconography, and special moves, quips, and lines. That's it. That's all you care about. It's just 5 things, and some of them are actually rolled into one, as in like game mechanics. Game mechanics, well, actually roll it into 2: game iconography and game mechanics. That's all they care about, you know. So if I get giddy when I hear like finish him in the movie. That's fun to me, or flawless victory. This is the element of that movie, and someone who like enters this movie as a critic, trying to like set this movie against like other blockbusters of its time, you'll look at it and say like, this is stupid, 1 out of 5. What are you people talking about? No, this is the point of this movie. Like, I want to see Johnny Cage hit Baraka in the nuts, and that's a highlight. Okay, or I want to see Scorpion, like say, get over here. You know what I mean? Like, if you played the games, if you're on the same page, you know what I mean. If you're a critic who just like, I don't know, like for whom this is an assignment for a publishing outlet, and you have no history playing these games, you don't know what you're talking about, educate yourself. And and if someone wants to take it seriously with me and tell me that I don't know what I'm talking about, I'm at least aware that there's a limit to what I know about the game series, because I grew up playing them, and I have certain expectations which may not be your expectations, because the game series is so damn vast and long that my own memories will be different to yours because of the time in which we entered. This is the James Bond sort of scenario of like, if you're the Daniel Craig guy, you may not understand why I like Pierce Brosnan. You know what I mean, right? So that's what people cared about, and this is at least what this movie and the previous one actually get right. What they don't get right, and this is where I kind of just emerge a little bit more sort of like miffed about this, is that no one in history of Mortal Kombat games, maybe there's a few weirdos, ever cared about the world building and the story. Absolutely nobody ever gave a shit. Case in point, if I remember, like when we played the original games, and you get to play the games. I mean, actually, if you choose a character, you get to see there's like a single slide of character backstory, and I think these were like written on a napkin, just to make sure that there's like 3 sentences worth of text accompanying characters, so you get a semblance of a backstory accompanying them. So like Liu Kang was like related to Kung Lao or whatever, and Prince Goro is whatever, and Sub-Zero and Scorpion had a feud because their clans had a feud, and that's all this was, like very surface level sort of world building that's sort of written on a napkin in a meeting room. Like, it's not even creative writing, major sort of fantasy writing. That's populating the sort of video game sort of culture now with like I remember like when World of Warcraft was extremely popular, was at the height of its popularity, and then a competing MMO came out a few years later called Rift. And if you read backstories and world building behind it, it's like, like AI would write better fantasy than this, But this was written by like a 20-something creative writing sort of graduate who scored a job at a video game studio, at a video game developer, and did their absolute best to cannibalize the culture of high fantasy and distill it into a set of characters and story arcs that they have absolutely nothing original about them. right? But in Mortal Kombat, these were all confined to like a single slide of text, and when you got to win the game at the end of it, like you'd find out what happened to Liu Kang at the end of it, and it's still like a single slide of text about what happened to him, right? And so like no one ever cared, like no one gave a toss about what world this takes place and who Shao Kahn really is. Like no one gives a shit. Like it's a boss. It's a boss at the end of the game who has special moves, and he has tactics, and there are tactics that they need to develop to defeat them. Like Shang Tsung was an interesting character because he could morph between other characters, and you had to have strategies for each of the ways that he would change. Right? Goro had his 4 arms, and where you had to plan around his attacks, right? But no one really cared about where they came from, what race they were from, what planet were they from. It's kind of like reading again like fan fiction in the Predator universe written by people on Reddit. It's absolutely illegible. It's downright brain dead. Like you go and read this stuff, and you will lose a few IQ points just for the pleasure of reading this, you know. And there are books, literal books written in that sort of style of what Yautja Prime was like and what the climate was like. Who cares? Oh my god, relax. Just, you know, read some proper fantasy. I don't know. Or just, you know, like, or you know, salam alaikum. Just do whatever you like. You know, it's just me venting because I got to read some of it and I nearly got diarrhea. Okay? That's what people cared about, just character mechanics and character iconography, and any element of world building and sort of dramatic arc setting is entirely surplus to requirement. No one cares about any of this, but in order to make a movie, you kind of have to have like a semblance of it so that, I don't know, it would look like a blockbuster, so it kind of just didn't stick out. Like it's almost like a requirement of conformity that you need to have some kind of a lore built into any movie, because otherwise it would look weird when set against all the Marvel films that have this sort of like decades worth of interconnected sort of relations between characters and worlds and subworlds and whatever, and story arcs. And it feels, again, like, because this movie tries to fit it all in, as in like you have the iconography, great, like I love the way Raiden looks this, even though I have a feeling for I have feelings for Christopher Lambert in 1995, even though he looked nothing like the character from the game. Like the characters look the part, they look great, the locations look great, the quips are there, it's fun, Kano is self-aware, always loved Kano. But there's like 40 minutes of just absolutely disgracefully terrible fantasy baked into this, like ladled over top of this. Like the whole movie, Mortal Kombat 2, starts with a whole like an extended scene about Shao Kahn just arriving at some kind of world. Is it Outworld? I don't even care anymore. And defeating a prince or a king, and then leaving Princess Kitana in shackles, enslaved by him. I'm just like, do I need to sit through this? Can we get into what we came here to see? No, we can't, because otherwise people would ask questions like, what are the motivations? They don't get to, like, these would be actual complaints made by viewers who didn't know what to expect out of this, or maybe classify themselves as wannabe critics, as in like, there's poor character development in a Mortal Kombat film, like duh. you know, and then they'll say like, well, they didn't, like, these characters don't get too much time. Like, yeah, I know, like in a different setting, like this is me trying to parse this in real time. In a different setting, in a different movie, I would be probably complaining about this. The characters don't get the time, or I don't get the time to hang out with them to understand what they're like and what they're like as people. And here, I don't care about them as characters. They're just avatars. They're costumes with their costumes and mechanics. That's all they are, and it's all they ever should be. And if you feel like, well, no, but they should have these backstories, and they should have these sort of ideas baked into them, because maybe some people care about them. Maybe there are some, but you know, like Midway tried in, I want to say, late 90s, there was this game called Mortal Kombat Mythologies: Sub-Zero, that they actually had a plan for releasing a whole series of character-based adventure games, where you get to inhabit just one character. The first one, the only one they released was about Sub-Zero, and I think they had plans for one for Johnny Cage, and I think maybe Scorpion and someone else, where you get to play the same character. So visually, it's kind of like a walking platformer with fighting mechanics, right? Where you get to develop a story and understand what the guy's supposed to be like, because you get to sit with him for the entire game and defeat bosses and whatever, and then just understand some more of his story, or actually at least go through an arc with him, right? And people hated it, critics hated it, and audiences didn't really buy into it. Like, one of the main reasons why people didn't buy into it was maybe because Midway tried to like build a platformer game using Mortal Kombat mechanics, where you have like essentially this is, like a just always move right kind of game, but using the same mechanics as the fighting game. And it turns out, like, when you have to precisely jump, this is just a frustrating experience when you just fall off a ledge because the game mechanics doesn't allow you to precisely jump or double jump or whatever, like in like Mario games or whatever, right? So I think there was an element of like, I'm sick and tired of this shit and I'm not playing this stupid game anymore, and I'm going to tell all my friends about it so they won't buy it. That led to the sort of the downfall of this series. But at the same time, there's also, if the story was compelling, maybe people would have stuck through it because the story was worth the juice was worth the squeeze, if that makes any sense. But it wasn't, right? Because no one ever cared about the backstories of these characters to an extent that would allow them or would empower filmmakers to make movies about them. So yeah, so having to sit through like a 12 or 15 minute preamble of where Kitana's sort of motivations come from is literally redundant, or understanding where Shao Kahn's sort of coming from and why he's a baddie is absolutely stupid. No one cares, no one ever cared, and no one will ever care, because it's a boss. He's someone you need to defeat at the end of the game, and I actually do not care about his sort of plight for survival or why he's a baddie. Like, he's not Darth Vader, he's just a costume with mechanics, like, once more. And at this point, if the filmmakers actually had, so Simon McQuoid, that's the guy who directed this, and the script was written by Jeremy Slater, who did Godzilla X Kong. So you kind of know, like, if you've seen any of this, you kind of. And by the way, Simon McQuoid, like, he's never directed anything before that. So his only sort of record is making these Mortal Kombat films, right? So, like, I'm willing to excuse like youthful naivety, if the experience is worth it, right? Like, the first one, like, again, like, because it didn't have the tournament sort of mechanic or the tournament sort of spine around it, was a little bit more insufferable than this. This movie actually filed under name a sequel that's better than the original. This one, okay, doesn't tell you much because it's still like 3 out of 5, and I don't know how else to find a way to love it. But yeah, having to sit through like 30 minutes of poor fantasy preamble, and then another 10 to 15 just sprinkled all throughout. Yeah, it doesn't really track. So the movie then clocks at, I want to say, just under 2 hours, and it shouldn't. It honestly should be like an 85-minute experience. That would be fun, camp, like a midnight screening cult classic, right? It's just stupid. Like all I wanted was like maybe this is me, maybe this is my fault, because like a movie like this would benefit from looking like a big budget Uwe Boll film, if that makes any sense. And it kind of sort of does, but it's bloated by the sort of world building that no one ever asked for. And I think you could easily take out like 20 minutes of this and it would have been fine. Maybe 95 minutes is the sweet spot for it. At the same time, that's where the problems are, because I think we now live in a world, I won't say now, we have been living in a world for the last, I won't say 15 years now, where like the running time is a proxy for quality, where like Michael Bay Transformers films and then later on comic book movies kind of established this status quo, this expectation that a blockbuster, a fantasy sort of science fiction blockbuster that's supposed to make a lot of money, needs to be long. It needs to be 2 hours plus, for instance, right? Or at least just around circling the sort of the 2 hour mark, right? And it shouldn't And it really, because the running time should be dictated by the story or by what this film's trying to achieve. And a movie like this should really work like a martial arts film. And show me a martial arts film that's 2 hours plus. There's very few of them. There's a reason why they're short, because the stories are usually secondary, even they're probably even tertiary to the experience, because usually with martial arts is the first thing that you care about, and then maybe the charisma of the performance, and then the story, such as it is. Like, who gives a shit about what Kickboxer is about, you know, or Bloodsport? Okay, it's not about that. And the template's kind of like there, as in like this is supposed to be built on a template of a martial arts film where the characters or the performances and martial arts sort of prowess of the performance is front and center. And here, with the added sort of makeup and iconography and the sort of mechanics taken out of the games, but it should really play like Bloodsport with fatalities. It should play like, you know, again, like this is like a 1-star film that I have a weird fondness for. The Jean-Claude Van Damme directed The Quest. That's kind of like my sort of this movie should be like that, okay? But with fatalities. It's just take out all the fantasy or most of the fantasy out of the equation, and just let me have fun with it. And even if it's a 1-star film, I don't care, because eventually we'll like, I have this movie on my shelf and I've seen it a number of times, even though it's stupid and brain dead. I still have fond memories of it, and I still have, like, you know, like there's an like, I love the idea of this movie existing, right? The same way I love the idea of this movie existing, Mortal Kombat 2 specifically. The first one is a little bit, it's a bit more difficult to sit through because it doesn't have these sort of blood sport mechanics sort of in it, right? But that's kind of where I see a problem with this, because the movie kind of behaves like, or maybe this is a kind of good example of this, maybe this is a good analogy that's not toilet related either, is that in a Mortal Kombat game, every single encounter with a new character, you need to win 2 rounds. The first one, the Mortal Kombat 1 from 2021, that's just for you to get a point on the board. The second one is where you win, right? But what happens, if you don't know, but you should know because these games were amazing, is that whenever you actually bring the opponent down to sufficiently low level in health, so if you beat the shit out of them for sufficiently long enough time, then you'll hear the sort of the iconic finish him or her, if it's Sonya Blade or Kitana or whoever, and they will just start flopping around. And you get like 3 seconds to mash all the buttons correctly to actually, first of all, make a choice of what you're going to be doing to them, if you know more than one combination of finishing moves. So you have, and I think the second one was probably maybe the third one. Like, the idea of having different fatalities even came a little bit later in the game. In the first one, all you had was just one fatality. So like a Scorpion would take off his mask, and then he would just show you there's like a skull underneath his mask, and he would just burn you into a crisp, right? But you have like 3 seconds to first decide what you're gonna do, and then mash the buttons correctly from a correct distance from the character. Some fatalities you had to execute from up close. Some of them you had to be at the other end of the screen, and some of them you had to be just around, like the middle, like just, I don't know, just far enough. And you mash them correctly, execute the technique, and then and you get to just feel like you've accomplished something. But if you mashed them incorrectly, all they would do would be just flopping around for 3 seconds and fall flat on their ass. That's it. That's all that would happen. You know? And I have a feeling this is kind of where this movie kind of sits. It's a movie that kind of just doesn't know how. It's a movie that's kind of just sitting in this sort of like a paralyzed state of anxiety where it needs to execute on something, but it doesn't know how to decide on what to do, and as a result of this, it panics and tries to execute babality, animality, and whatever, and friendship all at the same time from the wrong distance, and then just at the end of it all, it just flops out. And that's how I feel like a mixture of disappointment and happiness at the end of it all, because you get to defeat your opponent, but you're like, I missed an opportunity to do something cool. And that's, I think, where this movie sits. And now I'm listening to myself as I'm doing this and realizing, yeah, this is probably why I couldn't really dress it into words that would kind of just sound coherent and just a tiny bit. So apologies for this being a stupid rant, but this is kind of where I sit with this. This is like Mortal Kombat 2 is a movie that I really want to like, and I don't know how, because it wants to, and like it does the right things in the right places, but at the same time it just undermines itself everywhere else. And maybe this is an exercise in blind spot management. So if your blind spots are bigger than mine, maybe you're able to see like, yeah, this movie is amazing, 5 stars. And there are people who would think that. But honestly, I'm too old for this. I don't know how to hide so much in a blind spot, and then disregard the stupid levels of fantasy that I'm being force fed like a goose. You know, like a goose being fattened up to become foie gras. Okay, you know, I don't know how to swallow this. I don't know how to look past the fact that I don't care about any of the sort of fantasy elements. All I care about is the characters and the fact that they're funny and they're quippy and they get to execute techniques that I remember that were cool when I used to execute them on my buddies and friends and cousins, whatever. You know, when we played these games ourselves. So yeah, maybe this is it. This is kind of how you have to peg it. This is an exercise in blind spot management and a movie that you really shouldn't trust anyone but yourself with. So if you read critical reviews, they won't, unless they kind of just, well, have the right perspective. And kudos to all the critics out there. Most of them don't have the right perspectives for movies they watch, because they watch so many of them and they have like a template for how they parse what they see, and they don't have like the required sort of, like, they can't zoom out when it matters and zoom in when it matters too. It comes with experience for some of them, and some of the good ones really would understand. And it's actually, and the problem is that some of the good ones tend to be the older ones, but the older ones wouldn't have the cultural connection to the shit that you care about. Okay, so like if you, I don't know, if you like read reviews written by sort of established critics of this, if you read reviews of this movie written by established critics, like working for like RogerEbert.com or like Variety or I don't know, LA Times, they're probably too old to, like, they're probably old enough to be my parents, where I used to play these games, or maybe they were too old to you know, like they felt like playing these video games was cringe. Okay, because they were too cool for school, and maybe they just don't have the sort of the cultural connectivity to it, right? So you can't trust them, and at the same time, if you trust all other viewers who have, like, I don't know, bigger blind spots than you do or I do, they will convince you that this is the best film ever, and then you'll still emerge disappointed. So like, you actually have to go and see it for yourself. And with that, all I want to say is that, you know, probably in 6 months' time, kind of sort of like the first one, this will become like a bit of a cult classic, because I think it's made to be watched on like a streaming service with your buddies on a loop. By like, if you're like 14, this movie will be great, you know. And even though it's kind of sort of aimed at people like my age, people who grew up like, you know, playing the Mortal Kombat 2 in 1995. When Baraka was a brand new character, and you get to see him too in here. It's kind of like one of those, and you kind of have to disregard a lot. Like, you have to disregard the fact that nothing's really final in here, because we're establishing that people can be brought back from the dead. So whoever dies in here is probably going to be brought back in the third one, if they actually figure out how to make one, because I'm not sure if this movie's made enough money to substantiate another sequel, although I think it should. Yeah, it's kind of like a movie that's positioned in this weird flip-floppy place where it's sort of in panic mode of trying to decide which way to swing, and eventually just, you know, like, you win the game, but you don't get to do what you wanted to do. So I think this is what I want to say about Mortal Kombat 2. You know, like, long story short, this is a movie that I want to like, and I think it has everything that it needs to have to become a cult classic, kind of sort of like the previous one kind of showed it, even though it was more in line with, you know, like an adaptation of a Mortal Kombat mythologies Sub-Zero or Scorpion, really, because it was more kind of concerned with some kind of a mythology that, again, no one really cares about, or the amount of people who care about it is just vastly lower than the amount of people who care about seeing Sub-Zero and Scorpion just going at each other. I think this movie is on a trajectory to become a cult classic, to become like a bit of a staple, like 30 years from now, like the original one is now. Like there's gonna be an Arrow box set of all of them at some point in the future. But you kind of have to, like, there's a frame of mind that you need to inhabit in order to enjoy it, and you have to have, like, I don't know, you have to be prepared to put a lot of stuff in your blind spot in order, or just to be just willfully ignorant of some of the problems this movie has, in order to just extract some kind of enjoyment out of this. And I don't know if I made any sense. At least I feel like I've emptied myself successfully on this. So I think I can rest my case in here. If you can go and find this in the cinema, go and watch it and make up your own mind. But don't take my word for granted, because your sort of connectivity to this movie and your way of enjoying it may be completely different to mine, for many, many reasons. But if you're going to it, like, one thing I can actually say for sure is, if you're going to it expecting a fantasy film with a plot, a structure, and characters that you get to care about, it's going to be a bad decision, okay? So yeah. I hope you enjoyed what I had to say. I'm not sure if I made any sense. Leave a comment if you agree or disagree with my take, and catch you on the next one. So, bye-bye.